I'm Wally Jibson. I probably have the distinction of both serving in the Navy and the Army in World War II.
Boise, he went to Seattle and enlisted, and they called him to be a photo interpreter to go to school, where he was an engineer. He enlisted in 1942, and he just felt like he should go. In fact, he enlisted without me knowing it. I was so mad. I was. It really hurt me. He was working up in northern Idaho, and he had to enlist in Seattle, so he got on a bus and went over and enlisted. I went back to Boise, and I worked there. He was gone 2 years then, and he came home and then was gone again. And it was a pretty rough life. I feel bad about it. I wasn't active in the church then, which was a mistake. Had I been, you know, they would have kind of looked out for me. But I just stayed in our apartment and worked.
I was in the Navy on Guadalcanal in what they called a Fleet Air Reconnaissance Squadron. And the short name for it was VD-1, which used to give people a laugh when you told them you were with VD-1. But during the Battle of Bougainville, which was on the north end of the Solomon Group, the Marines had secured a beachhead, thought they had the island secured, and turned it over to the Army, as they usually do. And then they pulled out. They didn't get any resistance, particularly because the enemy was all on the other side of the island. And there were high jungles in between. So then the Japs decided to push the Army into sea. So the Army sent word down to Guadalcanal to our outfit. I asked if they could borrow 2 photo interpreters. And so they sent a B-25 down to pick us up. There were 2 of us, kind of opposite type of people. The other fellow was a New York City photo fashion photographer. And he was a young single fellow, and I was an old married kid from a beet farm in Idaho. But we went up together, and they had the Marines had 2 little airfields up there, a bomber strip and a fighter strip. So we let down to land on the bombing strip, and all of a sudden the pilot pulled up right fast, told me later that he got a radio message, "Don't go down, the Japs have this one." So we went a few miles on up the beach and hit on the fighter strip. So anyway, we checked in, and they said the 14th Army Corps had the island under General Griswold, and 2 divisions under them. So they said, we need 1 out in the division and 1 on the general staff. So the macho guy says, "I'll go out in the division." So I said, okay. We never saw each other for a few weeks. And he said, "Boy, I was eating K rations right from the time I left you." And I said, "Well, I was telling an orderly how I wanted my roast beef done." But that didn't excuse us from getting in the line of fire when they checked me into a tent. We had a foxhole in front of the tent, covered with coconut logs and dirt. About every night we'd get shelled from heavy artillery, and so we'd spend anywhere from an hour to 2 hours in that foxhole. And you soon get to tell the difference between artillery shells coming in and those of our people going out. So if that didn't get you out of the sack, we were had an active volcano on the island, and that would shake you right out of the sack about once a week. But about 3 weeks went by like that, and then thanks in part to the photo interpreters, we located their heavy artillery and were able to knock it out, bombing and our own artillery. And so it settled down pretty good, but I stayed there for a total of 3 months. And then they sent me back to the unit in Guadalcanal. But it was a very enjoyable experience in a way, because I got to find out how the Army fights, and I felt more active than I was back where Guadalcanal was pretty well secured then. But that's about the story of my overseas ventures.
He was in several battles that really worried me. When he was in Bougainville, it was kind of rough. They'd get shelled every night and things like that. And they slept in tents on this island. And when he'd been on this Bougainville island for about 2 weeks, I guess it was, and the Army general called and wanted him to come and be on his staff. And so he was there for 3 months, and that was a nice experience for him. He was fed well, the general would be fed well, and he ate right with the general, so he had good food then, and really better sleeping conditions. He had a tent with a cot in it, so it was better. And but then he went back to Guadalcanal for another, I guess about 6 months it probably was, before he came home the first time.
I was married, and when we'd come back, we'd go back to Washington. So she was able to go with me to San Francisco and then back to Washington in between. Ironically, we came out to San Francisco for our second tour the day they dropped the atomic bomb. And we called Washington to see if they'd change their orders. There were 2 of us. And they had taken the day off, and we were supposed to fly. So we talked to the Port Authority and said, "Can you stop us?" And he said, "Oh no, I can't stop you, but I can put you on something slower." So we said, "Put us on the slowest thing you got." They put us on an LST. It took us 10 days to get to Hawaii. And then ironically, when we got there and checked in, the fellow who checked us in was an old buddy from Guadalcanal. And he said, "If you guys had called me, I could have stopped you. Now you got to catch up to the 7th Fleet and be in on the surrender terms." So we'd check in every day, and by then there were 3 of us. Finally, one of them got called, and we took him out to the airport, and he headed for the 7th Fleet. The 2 of us stayed there till they put us on an aircraft carrier and said, "Go home." So I had to muster a Marine crew on board the carrier for 4 or 5 days, see if anybody fell overboard, but we were on the way. Well, it was in Sunday school. Our teacher said, "Did you get she didn't use the word abusive, but it meant the same thing." And I said, "Well, one incident made us this way. We had some natives come in and talk to us one day at our headquarters and told us what they'd been watching. And within 2 miles of our headquarters, they had watched 2 down pilots digging their own grave on the beach. And when they got their graves dug, the Jap officer took out his sword and cut their heads off. When our general heard that, he was so angry, he made up a drop sheet to send the natives, put it in Pidgin English, and told them to take their wives and pigs and kids and head for the deep jungle because of this atrocity that we had heard about. And he said, we're going to bomb and kill every Japanese we can find on this island. And we just about did. When I left there 3 months later, the only Japs that were left were those that had gone into the deep jungle and didn't know the Battle of Bougainville was about over. But an amusing thing happened on these drop sheets. The New Zealanders were very good spies. We used to use them to go spy on the enemy. They were fearless, so they'd get close enough to hear him talk and so on. So they were reporting to us one day, and he said, you know, in his own brogue, you know, one of those, we're using one of your drop sheets for bum fodder. And I said, well, I hope he's here long enough to find out that we meant business. And I suppose he was. But I was about to say we should have dropped some cereal, but cattle.